The amazing 10.2 Havoc Demon Hunter rework is here, and it's answering everybody's concerns, almost. Momentum is being reworked, which has divided the community and fans of Havoc altogether, but previous dead talents are also reworked to provide new, interesting tools like Fel Barrage. That and the repositions of talents to give you more defensives, make the spec better, and even if you're still not convinced, there are more changes to make you consider Havoc as a main in 10.2. Metamorphosis has been addressed once again to be a 3-minute cooldown down from 4, and with the talent from the general class tree, you currently end up having it at 2 minutes, which is more and more in line with what the current DPS specs have. This is likely because nobody picked the first of the Illidari talent from the class tree, which was also removed, and likely would have never been picked with it being a choice node with Demonic. Fundamentally, meta is not an amazing cooldown, definitely not one that warrants a 4 minutes waiting time without any change. Burst damage has been an issue for Havoc in raids, and this helps towards fixing that issue. In conjunction with it, the duration has been lowered from 24 seconds to 20 seconds, essentially cutting a fifth of its duration for a fourth of its cooldown and netting it more uptime. But as Jedith pointed out, this opens up the possibility of making meta a stronger cooldown since the duration is smaller. And we know this is still on the table because these are not the last changes we will see with Havoc. And also, still a hope factor is that the dev doing the Havoc rework is also the dev that works on the Rogue rework, and Rogue is a banger. You also get two important abilities baseline: Demonic Appetite and Fel Eruption. Appetite was always so strong that you always ended up picking it, meaning it wasn't much of a choice in the talent tree. Furthermore, it being baseline frees up a talent point to spend elsewhere. Fel Eruption has a different impact. This is something you wanted but couldn't get. And I say couldn't in the sense of optimizing your damage prevented you from spending a point in the talent. Now, the single target stun is baseline, giving you a boost to your utility during a dungeon on top of everything you already had, putting you essentially ahead of the other specs like Arms or Fury, who still have the talent into their single target stuns. And lastly, as part of stuff that you will be getting baseline, Fel Rush has had a massive damage buff of 60%, with a caveat of certain Fel Rush talents being slightly weaker. Overall, this won't change the damage Fel Rush does if you go for the same build, but instead makes it better on its own, which is a buff if you go for non-Fel Rush talents. As for the new toys you get to play with, first of all, looking at the talent tree, we can see that we still have two placeholder options here. To talk about these two, we need to address the row below, which with the current pathing, you cannot skip getting one or both of these. This is great from designing defensives where you don't put them at odds with damage increasing nodes. One new talent here is Deflecting Dance, which absorbs incoming damage up to 15% of your maximum health while you are blade dancing. This is reminiscent of how the old blade dance used to work, where during it you would dodge all attacks, even spells if I recall correctly, where people would use it back in BFA to soak big hitters and potentially one-shots. It has since been removed, and now we get this in turn, which is arguably better for the game. Absorbing 15% of your max health might not sound like a lot when you compare it with the old version of it negating a whole one-shot, but during the course of a long fight, this 15% max health absorb every time you use Blade Dance can add up for quite a bit. Obviously, a major addition to the tankiness kit. It's also a choice node with Mortal Dance, the PvP counterpart, which makes Blade Dance reduce the target's healing received. Because these nodes have been made mandatory, it's safe to assume that the placeholders above will not be utility or tankiness, or essentially the design just recreates the same issue it had before, which means those two will likely never get picked. So we can assume that these will be damage nodes, and since each side has a theme, the left one will likely be single target, Chaos Strike, or maybe I-Beam focused, while the right one will be Blade Dance, or rather Throw Glaive focused. And I'm mostly leaning towards Glaive Throw, since going further down the tree on that side, we see the constant intermingling of Immolation Aura, Blade Dance, and Throw Glaive, where you can never go for just one of these all the way without taking talents for the other two. But we will see once new stuff makes itself known on the PTR. Inertia is probably the most controversial new talent, but design-wise, one of the best things the spec received. It essentially is momentum, but with its damage condensed in 5-second bursts for a lot more damage than momentum. For those people who never liked this mechanic, you will likely not like this at all, but you will like it a little bit better than momentum, and here's why. First of all, the actual momentum talent has been changed to give slightly less damage, 6% instead of the live version 8% to be exact, but last 1 second longer. Gameplay wise, this means you can keep up momentum for essentially 100% uptime, with the implication that you will be using Fell Rush and Vengeful Retreat on cooldown. Although I personally find this interesting, I understand not many people vibe with this, and if it's okay for folks to criticize being forced into Breath of Sindragosa for Frost Decay, their momentum critique is also valid. And now comes Inertia. This essentially gives you the value of momentum numerically, slightly less overall, but only once every 20 to 30 seconds since its proc is tied to using Immolation Aura. You'll have to Fell Rush, but only when Immolation Aura is ready and used to give you the Unbound Chaos buff. That way you are left with a lot of uses of Fell Rush for mobility and whatever you want, while still retaining the momentum feeling for those masochists like myself who enjoyed the flavor. And for those people that love momentum, you have a choice between a simple consistent uptime of the momentum buff or condense it into burst windows, which is a choice that all DPS players should have between optimizing high consistent damage or burst damage. One last new toy to play with is a new capstone called a Fire Inside. This is not yet implemented on the PTR for me to tell you how it feels, but we can definitely theorize. It gives you another charge of Immolation Aura to use and a 30% chance to refund the charge when pressing it. On top of it, the damage for multiple Immolation Auras uses will stack. Since we just came out of Inertia and Unbound Chaos, this seems that it has clear synergies with those two, although we don't know if back-to-back Immolation Aura into Fell Rush into Immolation Aura into Fell Rush, if we get the reset, will end up extending the Inertia buff for more uptime. It might not even be the best way to play these mechanics since you are using two GCDs inside of the Inertia window that are low impact, the exception maybe of Unbound Chaos, but it's interesting to see if it becomes a playstyle. The likely more interesting turnaround would be the synergy with Growing Inferno and Rage Fire for some high sustained AoE damage and a burst at the end. However, the tier set focuses a lot on Throglaive and its synergies with reducing the cooldown of the hunt, which numbers wise is very weak on the PTR at the moment, but these get buffed to be relevant. You'll hopefully be incentivized to pick Throglaive talents, which, like mentioned before, are intermingled with Immolation Aura and Blade Dance talents, meaning you might not have enough points to be spent on momentum builds. This is because you cannot get to a Fire Inside without spending 2 points into Soul Render, and spending those points into a Throglaive amp without actively incorporating Throglaive into your rotation feels poop. The tier set makes Blade Dance Throglaives as well, which makes the talent not entirely useless, but still feel bad and a waste on the PTR right now. I tested it out in the raid, and no matter how much I tried, with me being a noob and all, I couldn't get it to deal even close to what momentum playstyle accomplished by ignoring Throglaive completely. This is not a good sign, first of all, for the new talents, and second for the tier set. We will either see Soul Render not be the only way to get to a Fire Inside, or Throglaive made into an actual part of the AoE kit for Havoc. The biggest talent that was redesigned is likely a tie between two, actually. First, Fell Barrage is now Breath of Sindragosa. It's not, but I thought it was when I read it first. What it does now is that it will no longer be a channel, and instead a buff on you that drains your fury and shoots bolts of fell magic. It's supposed to drain your fury rapidly and deal damage for as long as you can fuel it. Now the tooltip says rapidly, while the Wowhead article says 15 fury per tick. Not sure if it's tick as in 1 round of damage, or tick as in for each bolt of damage you pay 15 fury. I think none of these actually matter, since the intent of it is to drastically deplete your fury, so it will never actually become a Breath of Sindragosa mechanic that you can work to maintain. Sure, you can do some cute stuff like popping it and immediately go into I-beam with blind fury, but I sometimes even lose all of the fury before my I-beam finishes, which is great in a sense since the Breath of Sindragosa mechanic is not particularly loved by the Frost Decay community, so would be surprising to see this being made into other specs as well. Playstyle wise, you will likely pop it and either do an I-beam channel or go into Fellblade, since there are not a lot of other fury generating buttons you would like to press during the window, and you will definitely not like to press fury consuming abilities and gut the window of barrage completely. The other major rework is Father to the Flame. This one has good changes and questionable changes. The good change is that it now is no longer RNG and has 1.5 minute cooldown and gives you the buff when you kill the demon rather than when you collect the soul, and can also be one-shot by I-beam and Fell Devastation on top of Throw Glaive. Whether or not you will use I-beam to kill it, a big source of damage you would otherwise want to have for the buff rather than to get it, is a different discussion. Now the questionable change is that to proc it, you use Spectral Sight. That means Spectral Sight is now a 1.5 minute cooldown that pops the demon. First of all, for the sake of the ability, this makes a lot of sense. Demon hunters pop their special candy eyes to see the special enemies and blammo, spot the demon. But this also used to have utilities in detecting stealth mobs, which helps here and there and definitely good in PvP to spot stealthy gamers. Not as much in dragonflight dungeons or raids, but that means that in the future, if ever a mechanic is designed where you want to spot stealths, you cannot use it because you will proc your demon, or it might already be on cooldown because you procced your demon. Sure, the utility didn't see much use now, but we essentially use a core mechanic that makes Demon Hunter what it is to fix a cooldown. Personally, it would be cool to see a change where if you don't kill the demon that the Spectral Sight will proc, you get your cooldown reset on the ability. But hey, until Candy Eyes become relevant, Father to the Flame is a much better designed ability. Although not a full redesign, Glaive Tempest has received massive buffs. It deals more damage and hits more targets before it gets soft cap, 8 to be precise from the previous 5 enemies. Not much to say here except yay for more buffs. Isolated Prey had changes to more in line it with the criticism of momentum. Now, instead of including Fell Rush in its buffs, it instead gives 30% more damage to Immolation Aura. Instead of being forced to use Fell Rush for Fury, and if you never want to go the momentum route, then now you don't have to anymore. Although it still has a weird mechanic that makes Chaos Nova stun for 2 more seconds for a total of 4. Not sure if this will stay like this since Fell Eruption is now baseline and also stuns for 4 seconds, costs less fury, and has a shorter cooldown. Sure, you can say that now you have 2 sources of single target stuns if you need them, but you will never use them back to back reliably since they inflict diminishing returns, and even if you do want to have them both, what single target isolated mob will require 2 single target stuns from the same person in a window of 30 seconds? Sounds incredibly niche. Lastly, not really reworks but rather improvements on the talent tree, we have a bunch of talents that have swapped from being a 2-point cost to a 1-pointer, and you can see them on the screen right now. This is of course a welcome change because 1-pointers are just better when building a spec in terms of how the player interacts and feels about the talents, but outside of that, it essentially frees up more points to make more interesting and hopefully diverse builds. Some of these talents have also been tuned to reflect the power shift, and likely we'll still see changes, buffs and nerfs as the balance dictates for the entire spec. The gameplay as a consequence of the current rework is already massively improved, at least from a noob Havoc's perspective. One of the changes that reflect this is the GCD change of Fell Rush and Fell Blade. To be fair, the Fell Rush global is not noticeable since, based on the top geared and skilled Havocs, the difference went from a max of 0.4 seconds to 0.5 seconds, but Fell Blade feels so much better with the GCD change from 1.5 seconds to 0.5 seconds. This means that quickly after you Fell Blade, you can do your other stuff. This can work great for momentum moments where you either Fell Rush away and use Fellblade to get back in range and use the momentum window more efficiently, or it could make the Essence Break combo less punishing if you use the abilities in a wrong order and risk losing a global or 2 during your DPS windows trying to get back. At the very least, it makes the playstyle smoother, which is something anybody can appreciate. Lastly, a big quality of life improvement on the initiative talent where it used to proc off of a damage over time effect as well, as in you would vengeful retreat to reset its proc, but had stuff like soul render on your target that started the buff window too early before you could take advantage of it. A last minute confirmation about the momentum feedback came in from the devs where they confirmed more changes to happen to it, so people that dislike the playstyle can either find it more enjoyable by giving Fell Rush an ability to dash you to your starting point and not force unnecessary camera movement. This could either be in place of the missing talent nodes or maybe baked into another talent already existing. At the very least, once again, the devs are listening to player criticism and trying to find better ways of implementing the playstyle. And if you are still not convinced that the rework is amazing enough to bring you back to the spec, we have proof of how the same developer did an amazing job at reworking Rogue, with both subtlety and assassination feeling incredible to play with by having the majority of the issues fixed.